I guess all know the reason why Taiwan might be at least a ticking bomb. Whether we know that it is a miracle or not, I'm not sure. That people who have been there often think so. And William Stanton, who's a professor at various Taiwan universities, who's American, said that too few of us recognize this miracle, and too few of them, the Taiwanese and themselves, recognize this miracle. So he is sort of has seen it as his task to try to also encourage the Taiwanese to look upon their own country as a place to be proud of. Of course, we will come back to the question about which aspects of this miracle are in danger of being lost. But Taiwan is in many ways a miracle. By the way, Professor Stanton and me, we have in common that both or neither of us is an expert in Taiwan studies as such. We are experts in various fields, but not in that field. But we have, both of us have very extensive experience from Taiwan. I've been there every single year since 1984. And I have connections with Taiwan, both academic connections, family connections, and I also have an organization there that I started in the 1980s, Arkham School of Meditation, in the Taiwan branch of that. So I have a lot to do with Taiwan, but we'll see. So many of you probably know that Taiwan, like Singapore, like South Korea, like Hong Kong, had this kind of economic miracle thing happening in the 1960s and 1970s. They are the four Asian tigers. And there are many things you can mention. I'm not going to read all the things that that are on the slides, and I don't think you should actually take your time to read all the things either, because then you will miss what I'm saying. But the main thing is that Taiwan is, economically speaking, something that has, since the 1960s, gone up and up and up until the 1990s or 2000s. Then it's been more of on a plateau, but it's still one of the few places in the world that still has economic growth these days. It's a competitive society in many ways, and so it is, on the economic side, definitely a kind of miracle. It is definitely also a democratic miracle, in the sense that from being a more or less a dictatorship under Chiang Kai-shek until he died in 1975, and under his son a little more liberal dictatorship until he died, or almost until he died in 1988. He, at the end of his life, began democratic reforms in 1986. All of a sudden, people who demonstrated in the streets were allowed to demonstrate. Before that, they would have been very much held back and suppressed. And then they were allowed even to form a party, which had not been possible before. So from 1986 onwards, and the next year, martial law was lifted. And from that point on, and then when Chiang Kai-shek's son, Jiang Jingguo, died in 1988, the one who took over was the vice president, who was a local Taiwan person, not one who came over from the mainland, Li Denghui, and he then ruled the country and gradually liberalized the country until in 1996 there was a full free presidential election, which he won by a large margin under threats from China. So it is definitely a very interesting place as a Chinese or Asian democracy also. That it's also #1 in Asia with regard to happiness. That's of course nice. I'm not sure what that actually means, but that's good. And whether or not, yeah, well, it's a kind of a paradox that in these UN and other sort of overviews of rule of law and human rights, Taiwan is not included at all. Why? Well, because it's not by the UN, of course, regarded as a country. It's part of China. It is that it was the first country in Asia to recognize same-sex marriage, probably also tells us something about its extreme willingness to be politically correct, that it wants to be part of the world, and it's because it is shut out of so many cases, in so many cases, it wants to sort of mark that that it is part of the world and wants to be part of the world. This was actually in spite of the fact that a referendum went against the introduction of same-sex marriage. So, okay, Taiwan is also a miracle of health in the sense that it's almost free healthcare. It's #1 on healthcare indexes. And as we have, many of us probably have seen, it is a country that has more than almost any other country been able to combat COVID-19. Altogether, this was yesterday, 540 cases, of whom 493 have recovered. And for several months already, only 7 deaths from COVID-19. So low crime, free and inexpensive education, convenient transportation. That's of course much easier in a country where people live very close together. But nevertheless, it's a very good, nice thing. Excellent restaurants and beautiful scenery. The scenery part, there's no statistics for that, but I can just mention that in Taipei city, which is I mean, several million population city, sometimes you only have to walk for 20 minutes, and what you see is mountain upon mountain upon mountain. It is it's almost as like Bergen or like Oslo, that you have nature very close to you, even when you are in this metropolis. A miracle for foreigners. It is often, these are some examples, it's often sort of named as #1 in terms of general friendliness towards foreigners and positive attitudes. It's a very open country, and people in general are very helpful. I can just mention that already in the 1980s, when I came to Taiwan for the first time and my Chinese was not yet very good, I knew enough Chinese to be able to ask my way, but I very often didn't understand the answer. But no problem, they would just simply take me there. So in that way, I also got to know very many people. And this kind of general attitude is still very much a part of society there. So, it's also a place where very many different outlooks on life coexist, where you have sort of this, what in China was the May 4th movement from 1919 onwards. The sort of secularism and belief in science is very much also part of Taiwanese society, but at the same time, an enormous amount of temples in folk religion. There are huge Buddhist groups counting millions of members, and different ones with different profiles. There are Christian groups that I had never heard of before I came to Taiwan. I thought I came from a Christian country, but I was exposed to much more of the variety within Christianity in Taiwan than I am in Norway usually. There are quite a few new religions. And then it's when I say here, every man his method, that's because there are so many people out there trying to teach you something that is going to help your life in one way. You just have to put your arm up like this or like that, or do something every day and do it exactly the way I tell you. There are so many ways of doing this, and some of them work, some of them I guess don't, but it's a nice way. Meditation groups also, both religious and secular ones. And as I told you, I am one of those who have started one meditation group in Taiwan with Akem there. It's also a place where there's an enormous amount of linguistic plurality, which is a very big change from the Chiang Kai-shek dictatorial days, where everybody had to learn to speak Mandarin, and where if you spoke anything else, if you spoke another Chinese dialect or an Aboriginal language in school, even in the breaks in school, you would be fined. And your fellow students would tell the teacher, he's speaking dialect, and you would be fined. Those days are gone. Now, in addition to everybody learns Mandarin, yes, but you also have everybody needs to have a so-called mother tongue education, either in Southern Min dialect, which is the most dominant dialect there, or in Hakka dialect, or in one of the 16 languages with more than 40 dialects of the Aboriginal languages of people who lived there before the Chinese came to Taiwan. They are just only some 100,000 people, but they have exams for more than 40 different variants of their languages. And now also in some parts of Taiwan, you also have special education in immigrant languages, Vietnamese, Indonesian, Malay, Thai, Tagalog, Khmer, and Burmese. Still fighting for recognition is Taiwan Sign Language, which is of course different from sign languages in other places. Okay, so this is a place that has many both liberal and economically sound and interesting aspects with it. And what is the sort of background of this of all these miracles? And there are of course many answers to that question. One possible answer is that throughout history, Taiwan has been on the outskirts. It's never been the Middle Kingdom. It's never been a central place that sort of could pride itself of being at the center, and that has made them as a kind of national character, if you like, a people with much more humility than we see in other parts of Chinese societies, and much more openness. When it was discovered by the Portuguese in 1542, they just, I'm not sure they even landed there, but they put it on the map and called it Ilha Formosa, the beautiful island. It wasn't on the map before that. But at that time, it was basically inhabited by Austronesian tribes, those who are now called the Aborigines. Then when the Dutch came, and in northern Taiwan also the Spanish for a period, they were the ones who had this sort of large scale import of a Chinese workforce. So that's when Chinese immigration to Taiwan actually started. Before that, this wasn't really a Chinese place at all. So it was then a kind of colony. Then in 1662, Koxinga, a Chinese who was loyal to the already fallen Ming dynasty, came to Taiwan. Still then at the outskirts, China was now ruled by the Qing dynasty, but he was loyal to the Ming dynasty who had fallen almost 20 years earlier. Um, he and his son and grandson ruled it for some years, for 20 years, until his grandson gave it up and handed it over to China, so that Taiwan became a Chinese prefecture in Fujian province. And then it didn't really mean much to China at all for 200 years until it was sort of elevated to province level, became Fujian Taiwan province in 1887 and had actually China's first railway. Before, only 8 years later, it was ceded to the Japanese, who ruled the island until 1945, when it was ceded to China again. And then for 4 years, it was part of the whole China before the revolution, and then when Chiang Kai-shek moved there. So for the last 125 years, it's only been 4 years that China and Taiwan have actually been together, and the People's Republic of China has never ever had actual jurisdiction over Taiwan. The United States was ready now that they saw that China was lost to the communists. They were ready to say that, okay, Taiwan, let it go the same way. They weren't really prepared to support Chiang Kai-shek until the Korean War. Then they needed it as a place both to recruit people and to send people who were taken as prisoners, and it was a base for them in the 1950s. So that's when sort of the United States support of Taiwan actually started. So this place at the outskirts of things may have shaped some of the kind of basic attitudes that have created this miracle. Now the ticking bomb after Hong Kong. Hong Kong, we know, has got its national security law, where things have been crushed. The sort of liberties of Hong Kong have been crushed to a large extent. And Hong Kong, of course, is seen as although at the outset it was seen as a sort of a positive thing to show the Taiwanese that you can be part of China and still have your own life. Now it has become a template for solving the Taiwan problem, so that the Hong Kong national security law can become a template for the Taiwan national security law, which means that one country, two systems, this idea is dead, that China sees that it doesn't need to heed international reactions, and there haven't been all that many international reactions. There have been some, but not very serious ones. And also perhaps that, one must admire their skill. What you see also in Hong Kong is that they don't do what we fear. They don't go in with the People's Liberation Army and just crush everything as soon as the protests start. They bide their time, they wait, and at some point they simply then put in place a piece of law that makes it impossible to go on with the kind of demonstrations they had in Hong Kong. And this may also be a kind of template for Taiwan. They don't necessarily need to invade. There are many other options. We'll come back to those options. But so far, It's what is obvious is the military buildup, massive naval buildup, both in order to be able to invade Taiwan, but also in order to push the US out of the Western Pacific, with also the new missiles that the most advanced of them are probably not necessary to just to attack Taiwan. So they're probably more there in order to be able to attack US warships and bases. So what we also have seen a lot of in the recent period is that Chinese warplanes enter the air defense identification zone of Taiwan and cross the median line between Taiwan and mainland China. And just recently in September, claiming that there is no median line, which is in effect abandoning a 60-year practice. And also writing in their sort of state-oriented newspapers, this is not a warning, it is a preparation to retake Taiwan. And then have also naval exercises along the coast and in the Taiwan Strait, launching missiles that are called the aircraft carrier killer, etc. So people are asking, both in Financial Times and The Economist, will China and US go to war over Taiwan? Will the US really want to involve itself in a war with China over Taiwan? And economists saying that it's getting costlier and deadlier. Now, if they are to retake Taiwan, when should it happen? There is a saying, I'm not sure that it is true, but there is a saying that Xi Jinping, the president of China, said to some military units in 2012 or something, that 2020 was the year when Taiwan was going to be reunited with the motherland. And there may be, I mean, the increased activity now also in a way pointed in the same direction. So I was a little nervous that they would have already taken Taiwan before I came here. Then I would have to rewrite my talk. Why would they do that in at such an early date? Well, the longer they wait, the weaker Chinese identity will be in Taiwan. There are still many people in Taiwan who are either first generation or second generation immigrants from the mainland, but of course fewer and fewer. And the younger generation have often no interest in a Chinese identity. You also have the sense that they wanted to interfere in a way with Taiwan politics, and that backfired when in Kaohsiung, in the southern city of Kaohsiung, Han Kuo-yu from the Kuomintang, from the Nationalist Party, he was able to win in a very unlikely victory in a place where this party had very few supporters originally, because the Chinese had held back all the tourists from China, from mainland China, which had been an enormous source of revenue for the area. Han Kuo-yu said that he would be able to negotiate with China. He would be able to, and sort of manage to convince the people to elect him. But then once he was elected, he also became a presidential candidate and lost big, and then was actually put out of office as mayor of Kaohsiung. So in that case, the mainland China or the Communist Party or whatever were not very lucky in their way. So they might feel that these sort of indirect ways of having influence don't work. We need to go in and take it. And the only party in Taiwan which has been very, in a way, pro-China, or at least pro-unification, is no longer reliable. They have pulled themselves out of what was called the Cross-Strait Forum. Their new leader, Johnny Jiang, no longer mentions what they have been talking about all the time about the 1992 consensus, that everybody agrees that there is one China, although one may have different definitions of which China this is. That was a kind of consensus that was the basis for negotiations between the two parts. But he no longer mentions that. And very recently, very unexpectedly, this party and their leader pushed for diplomatic relations between what they call, and what is still its official name, the Republic of China and the United States of America. That means between Taiwan and America, which is very surprising, and where people are still discussing what actually lies behind it. One thing that definitely lies behind it is that without such a move, they would risk very much be played out on the sidelines, because in general, the pro-China atmosphere in Taiwan is not very strong, and they were, so they needed to be almost better than the independence-oriented party, the DPP, Democratic Progressive Party, at playing this independence card. Of course, 2020 is also a little after Trump has labeled China as a strategic rival and started a trade war. China's international standing is at a low, and Taiwan's international standing is perhaps at a high, partly because of their success in combating COVID-19. 2020 is certainly also going to be a year with American election chaos, whoever wins the election. It is a year of chaos with regard to COVID-19, which also China has managed to combat fairly well, in sharp contrast with much of the rest of the world. It's an economic slump period in much of the world. There's a new Japanese prime minister who you don't really know yet where will he go. So this is and he probably doesn't know exactly himself either. So this is a period where China's invasion would not perhaps incite a lot of international reactions. In addition to the pressures from home for Xi Jinping, for the president of China, that both from the powerful elites and from sort of general popular nationalism. But most people do not think that it will happen this fast. Some experts say that the armed forces would be capable of mounting an attack in a year or two, but it would happen, more likely happen by the end of the decade, perhaps 2028. I'm not sure what lies behind the exact dating to 2028, but there are many alternatives, many alternatives. They don't have to have a full-scale invasion of the island. One alternative is a war of attrition, wearing down Taiwan's military. Whenever the Taiwan's military need to intercept Chinese planes in the air defense identification zone or east of the median line, that means they need an increased combat readiness. They have really greatly increased maintenance costs of these airplanes, fighters, and so the budget is a problem. and they don't have, like China can use fairly low scale fighter jets for these purposes. Taiwan don't have many of those. They have either very advanced things or things that can't be used. So this is a way of gradually wearing out or wearing down Taiwan's military. Another alternative, which is being used all the time, is economic warfare to choke Taiwan's economy, largely by limiting tourism. Chinese tourism to Taiwan was a great source of revenue. They were all over the place, and people earned a lot of money. And then uh, after Tsai Ing-wen, the current president, became president in 2016, it was they were prevented from going there as tourists, which means that a lot of revenue was taken away from Taiwan. On the other hand, there are also many incentives to try to get Taiwanese people, especially business people, to mainland China with tax breaks, subsidies, grants, etc. Um, so that's also a way to erode Taiwanese society in a way. And yeah, we already talked about the success that backfired with Han Guoyu. But that's a way also of using economic warfare that in that case didn't play out nicely for the Chinese. There is, of course, all the time a propaganda war that there are many Taiwanese media these days which are then in the hands of China loyal people. They're also planting anti-American sentiments. They are selling us their scrap military equipment and they demand that we eat their contaminated meat. And we are just a pawn in their game anyway. So you also hear those kind of voices. And they may also create limited sort of actions that create shock and fear to shake public morale. Then, of course, the diplomatic warfare, which has been going on for many, many years. They were expelled from the UN in 1971, and they were allowed observer status in the World Health Assembly from 2009, not 19. But then that was revoked in 2017. There are sports events, international organizations that they are not able to participate in, lots of them. And they now only have 15 diplomatic allies, and most of them you haven't even heard of, or even if you've heard of them, you didn't know that it was a country. Marshall Islands, Palau, Nauru, Tuvalu, Eswatini, well, the Holy See we know, etc. And some of the Latin American places we do know. Also they're very keen on having the right names for things. Taiwan, of course, is still Republic of China in spite of having been part of an independence movement, ruled by an independence movement for many, many years. And they need to participate as Chinese Taipei, not Taiwan. Or airlines all over the world are forced to add China after Taiwan in their routes, etc. And this is just, no, you don't see it. That they even Norwegian the government, when Taiwanese ask for residence here, they are told that they are citizens of China, which is not exactly what they may feel themselves. So what can Taiwan do? They have to be a porcupine, they said, so with these, well, because lions don't like to eat porcupines because they will be, so they have to learn what they call asymmetric warfare. smart mines, portable missiles, and exploit Taiwan's terrain, which is two-thirds mountains. There are a few landing beaches there, and they're able to detect, intercept, and destroy also Chinese missiles during their climbing phase. What can Taiwan do to the economic warfare? They can try and shift as much as possible over of the activity over to the Southeast Asian countries for their lower edge production, and back to Taiwan for their higher edge production. And they have been able to increase tourism from Japan, South Korea, and the Southeast Asian countries. But otherwise, this new policy has had limited effect. Diplomatic help. Well, Tuvalu and Eswatini called for Taiwan's readmission to UN. For some reason, they weren't able to get it through. It's not the kind of countries that you would expect to be able to win over China in that context. Seeking international attention is, of course, important. Tsai Ing-wen, the president, current president, her international status, she's by time sort of counted as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. Whether that is true or not is another case, but it's a kind of recognition. Their COVID-19 successes have been duly noted. Their international contributions in terms of health to some extent, their democracy, and their problems with the World Health Organization. Norwegians, for some reason, have often seen Taiwan, or the Taiwan case, as something that the right side of politics supports, not the left part of the, and that's perhaps a heritage from the Mao days, when Norwegian students at least were very much allied with Mao's projects, and where Chiang Kai-shek was still in power in Taiwan. But there's still this tendency that Taiwan is supported more by the right side than the left side. One very important thing is for Taiwan to be useful to the US as an unsinkable aircraft carrier that can shoot in many different directions and we can go on from here. So this status quo is definitely over with regard to the relation between China and Taiwan. Many status quos in the world are over, and that brings some new opportunities. It also brings some new risks. So the question is, what do they want? And that very much depends on what way you ask them. So there is one Gallup by Taiwan Foundation for Democracy that says that 54% of Taiwanese want independence. Okay, that's a lot. And 23% maintain status quo, and 12% unification. Whereas if you have another similar Gallup, you have National Zhengzhi University, where much more than 50% wish to maintain the status quo in various different shades of status quo. And only 7% want independence as soon as possible. So it depends very much on on how you ask and who you ask. What is definitely true is that the case for independence and against unification has won extremely much since these things started in 1992. Then finally, who do they think they are? Do they identify as Taiwanese, as Chinese, or as both? And the number of people who identify as Taiwanese has risen enormously since these Gallup started in the 92. It's now at 67%, and almost all remaining percentages go to those who would see themselves as both Taiwanese and Chinese. Very few say that they're just Chinese. Then there's something about Taiwan. Can Taiwan really be a sovereign state? the Communist Party at some point thought they should be. And there's lots of discussions about is Taiwan a sovereign state? And they definitely say they are, and they have all the sort of basic characteristics of a sovereign state, but they have never declared themselves independent, and they haven't either had any referendum on the issue, and of course their independence is not recognized by the UN. And it's a question whether Taiwanese independence would violate the territorial integrity of the PRC, of which they have never been a part. That's a question. So there are many questions, and I think I will sum up by these 6 questions with unknown answers. Can the miracle continue? Will China invade or use other types of pressure? Will Taiwan be able to defend itself? Will the US support Taiwan in case of an attack? Is Taiwan a sovereign state after all? Is its population Taiwanese or Chinese or both? So these questions without answers are all that I can offer at the end. Thank you. And questions?
Thank you. There's 2 aspects you didn't mention, but I'm sure you have some ideas about it. And one aspect is that the Chinese Communist Party celebrated its 100 years, 100 years anniversary in July next year. Mm-hmm. And some reflect maybe this is that Xi Jinping want to include Taiwan before that, to have that as a big victory, so to speak. And the other aspect is the stability of the People's Republic in itself. I mean, they have a lot of problems internally. I mean, Tibet, Xinjiang, Inner Mongolia, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. So, and also other problems, of course, because of the almost 300 million migrant population. So I just wonder, I mean, I guess one reason why Taiwan does not have a referendum on independence or want to claim independence is that that will be a pretext for Beijing to do something. Yes. So, but otherwise it was an excellent lecture, excellent resume on the development and also of the relations between China and Taiwan. Thank you.
Thank you. Is 2021 the sort of celebrations of the Communist Party 100 years? Is that a serious thing in this case? It's one of them. It's one of the many years that you can count and that you can see as, yes, it would have been nice for Xi Jinping or for China to be able to say that now we are finally reunited as a nation or whatever. But it's hardly going to be sort of the decisive thing. I think in that case, in that sense, the Chinese have been, or the Communist Party or whatever, have been much more sort of willing to wait and see, wait until the moment comes, until you have a proper way of doing this. And probably, most probably, hopefully, this doesn't happen before 21. I'm going to Taiwan next month. I hope it's not going to happen while I'm there. So as for the instability of China itself, people have said that all the time. Since 1989, the Tiananmen incident, people have talked about sort of the days of the Communist Party in China are counted. And people are still talking about that. And I am not sure that it's any more true today than it has been. It's in some respects, they are definitely stronger now than they have ever been. Taiwan, Tibet and Xinjiang, they are nuisances, but they're not going to create anything like an upheaval in all of China. There are things, of course, in sort of the central parts of China also, but again, with also modern surveillance and everything, it's going to be a hard thing to actually create some kind of real alternative to the Communist Party for a long, long time, I think. So I could be wrong. In a way, I wouldn't mind being wrong, but I think maybe that's not going to happen very soon. Was there a third thing? No. Was there a third thing you mentioned? Or what? No. Yeah, thank you.
So 2 questions from Zoom. First, if mainland China is recognized as anti-human rights, will that not work positively for Taiwan?
If mainland China is?
Anti-human rights.
Yes, and the problem with human rights in the UN is, of course, that the Human Rights Commission is basically run by countries, at least partly by countries that have a great problem with human rights themselves, and I think most countries in the world, or most people in the world, know that mainland China has a problem with human rights, but whether it means anything to Taiwan as such, I'm not sure. It's a very clear contrast, of course, between mainland China and Taiwan in that respect. And it helps to bring sympathy to Taiwan. Whether it helps to bring actual support, I'm not so sure. Yeah.
Yes, and the second question is, should our universities here in Norway start independent relations with Taiwanese institutions, not only focusing on mainland communist China?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I don't think it's wrong to have relations to Chinese universities as well, but Taiwan has good universities, good academic institutions, and there are all good reasons to have collaboration with them. And in this case, there's not even a strong reaction from mainland China. If you do so, I mean, you might fear that having relations with Taiwan would actually ruin your relations to China, but it won't. You just have to use the right words. You should not say China and Taiwan. You should say mainland China and Taiwan. Otherwise, you sort of indicate that they are 2 different countries. I was once in a meeting with that was in China, where we had a dinner afterwards, where I was careless enough to say, I mean, in the midst of something, I don't remember what we were talking about, but I said China and Taiwan, and everything just got silent, and the rest of the time was not a very nice dinner. So.
Yeah, I have a question about what is Taiwanese society perception on the livelihood of war, because their military budget has been reducing over time. So it seems that they themselves are kind of maybe expecting a status quo of continuing, and not necessarily that there is going to be this ticking bomb so near.
The military budget is increasing now, but if you ask people in Taiwan, you will get very different responses to your question. I think for the political authorities who are in power at the moment, they see it as a very, very clear threat, and therefore also increase the military spending. Not enough, the United States says, but at least they do spend a lot more than they have done before. For a long time, it was in Taiwan, as in Norway, as in many of our countries, a sense that, oh, it's not going to happen. Nothing is going to happen. We have nice lives, and we're not going to, things are not going to. And by the way, Chinese won't kill Chinese. oh, I thought they had been doing that for some time. So there have been all sort of ways of reasoning about sort of perpetuating the status quo. But in Taiwan, in an even greater, to an even greater extent than in Norway and in Europe, the sort of status quo is falling apart. There are still many people in Taiwan who think that no, they're not going to. If they wanted to take Taiwan, they don't even need to invade. They can just sort of pull out the socket and say that none of the Taiwanese economic interests in mainland China will be able to get their money out. In that case, Taiwan would come begging, they would say. So I think many people see it as a very realistic thing that they are forced to some kind of coexistence or in reunification with China, but very many people refuse to see invasion as an alternative, as a realistic alternative. Yeah.
Could you say something about the role of students in terms of mainland China, Hong Kong, and what are their voices like in Taiwan?
Well, there was this movement, the sunflower movement in Taiwan some years ago. Was it 2014? I'm not sure. Which was very much run by students and young people, and which was very much directed against what was then considered to be a kind of sellout to China, where China would be able to enter into many of the markets in Taiwan that that would be a problem for some of the local Taiwanese. So that was a huge movement, which in a way was probably also part of the reason why in 2016, Tsai Ing-wen of the Democratic Progressive Party, so the more independence-oriented party, won in the elections. So after that, student activity has not been at such highs, and I'm not sure that they play a very significant role today in Taiwan. They did, of course, in Hong Kong until recently. In mainland China, no, hardly at the moment. And it's universities in China are to some extent being developed into very much sort of political indoctrination camps. So it is not easy there to see that the students, it's not that they can't think for themselves, they certainly do. But the whole context within which they do is much tighter than it used to be. That goes for much of Chinese society today, that it's there are many or much less you can do and say than you could only 10 years ago. So students may be important in specific situations, as they were in Hong Kong, as they were in Taiwan in 2014, I believe it was, and then up to the presidential election in 2016. Their long-term importance, I'm not so sure about. Thank you.